right, so at least on my watch, it's 10:30 sharp. And since we're packed with time, I would like to start. My name's Babette Never. I'm a researcher, senior researcher at the German Development Institute in Bonn. And I'm the moderator of the session, on this exciting session on behavioral insights and behavioral insights applications in developing countries. I'm very much looking forward to all the presentations we have. We have a tight program, so I don't want to take much time introducing everyone or talking a lot at the beginning now. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. As a standard now with digital conferences, please turn off your microphones and cameras unless you're speaking. While the presenters are presenting their work, you're welcome to put questions in the chat. I will, for time reasons, only allow for a maximum of 2 strict questions of understanding after each presentation, just to clear things up. I will either pick them from the chat or you can signal after each talk. And we shift all the other questions to the end of the session to then get into discussion. And don't be disappointed if your question is not discussed. We don't have much time, but you always have the opportunity to interact with speakers individually and see this as a start, as a sort of ignition of collaborations, questions, discussions. And with that, I would already like to turn over to Natalia, who's going to talk about lighting in Brazil. Natalia, please.
Hey, hello, good morning. Let me share my screen with you. My name is Natalia. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Federal University of Santa Catarina in southern Brazil, and I'm also a guest postdoc here at DTU Civil Engineering. And I'm going to present today our preliminary study about lighting and occupancy behavior of preschool classrooms. It was based on a field study in Brazil. So in any education program, the built environment is a fundamental part, and several studies have shown that this part, the physical space, is very influential in the learning processes of the children. Some of these studies have shown that different layouts and density in the classroom are associated to aggressive attitudes of toddlers and also like the ways that they behave. In recent studies, we also have found that the indoor environmental variables like thermal comfort, acoustic, lighting, they are associated also with the academic performance of children. And from these variables, the lighting and the flexibility of the classroom, they have more impact in the overall progress of the children. And also previous studies based on field studies in classroom have shown that children tend to prefer stay in those areas of the classroom that are more brighter or with higher illuminance levels. Despite of all of this information and evidence that we have, studies in kindergartens or preschool classrooms are very scarce, mostly because of the challenges that this kind of population represents to the researchers. But several techniques like behavioral mapping and also behavioral observation have shown very important and very reliable in matter or in the way that they can afford to bring those information that cannot be acquired through user self-report. In classrooms, especially in kindergarten, this kind of research is important because the teachers, they are in charge of the configuration of the classroom, and then the students, they are in a very passive role as occupants. So understanding this kind of studies and the behavior of the children could be a pathway to understand better how these environments could be improved. So following this idea, the aim of our study was to identify the usage and occupation characteristic of preschool classrooms. And for this, we use the luminous environment as a background to understand the different activities and the ways that these activities and the lighting conditions are related to the areas that are occupied by the children. So we perform together analyze with this information. Our study was based also then in field studies performed in 6 preschool classrooms in Florianopolis, 2 classrooms in 3 different schools in Brazil. The studies were performed from March to December of 2016, and the period during the classroom were surveyed was between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. That was the period of attendance of the children in each classroom. Each classroom then was visited or surveyed for 3 weeks over this period, 1 week between summer or autumn, another week in between by the end of autumn and beginning of winter, and another week at the end of the winter and beginning of the spring. Every week was surveyed every day. So we were doing this behavioral observation and the luminance measurement simultaneously from Monday to Friday during this period. This, you can see here some of the characteristics of the surveyed classrooms. All of them are very different. In the first line of this figure, I'm presenting the classrooms from kindergarten type A, that was a private school. In classroom 1, in all the schools, we were surveying children between 4 and 5 years old. And in classrooms number 2, we were surveying children between 5 and 6 years old. Kindergarten type B and kindergarten type C, they were public institutions, between them also a lot of differences physically and also in the pedagogical models. We then use behavioral observation to understand the behavior of the children, and for that behavioral observation, we perform direct observations that were based on the observation of the activities and the behavior of the children in the classroom. And we also use indirect observation using notes and time-lapse photography to register these activities and the behavior of the children. The behavior was focused on the ways that the children use this space and where were they located during these activities. With this information from the behavioral observation, we developed behavioral maps. These maps were built based on a grid spaced 50 centimeters. And with this grid, we plot the contour maps to calculate the areas where the children were located and the size of these areas. Also, the behavioral observation allows us to understand the period that the classroom were used and how the distance between the children and the windows were the differences of these distances. Simultaneously to the behavioral observation, we also run illuminance measurements. These illuminance measurements were using a grid of 9 sensors, 3 plus 3 sensors, and here in each classroom you can see in the blue area was the areas that we use to these measurements. With the illuminance measurements, we plot illuminance maps for each activity, so we were able to identify the luminance levels in each activity. We also calculate with this data the mean illuminance during each activity, and we perform a further analysis using a useful daylight illuminance per activity to identify the ranges of illuminance during each activity. Then we overlap these behavioral maps and the illuminance maps to understand the differences or the relationship between the areas that were occupied by the children and also the areas that were with more or less illuminance levels. So here in the results, I'm showing you as an example here the contour maps for the occupancy periods. This is the first week of survey for each classroom. Here in the first row, you can see the school A, each classroom, classroom 1 and classroom 2, and the columns are the day of the week. In colors, the orange color would represent the most dense areas every day. Here, every classroom, for example, this part here is the Monday, so all the activities that were developed during the Monday in this classroom. So we, as first, we saw that the pedagogical model, it plays a very important role in the way that the classroom is used. For example, in kindergarten A, that was or is a private school, the pedagogical model is more attached to a timetable, and the teacher is the center of the activities. They are all directed by her. So here in these classrooms, the children were most of the time arrayed in the center or in the middle of the space. While in kindergarten B and C, the pedagogical model is more free. The children, they didn't have a specific desk, while in kindergarten A, every child had a specific desk to stay the whole day. So here in kindergarten B and C, we can see different ways of the use of the space that were more free. Usually the children were developing the activities in small groups or in big circles. And when they were working in big circles around, these areas they were located more closer to the window. Regarding the illuminance maps, here I'm presenting an example of the illuminance maps for kindergarten A, the classroom A1. During the second week of the measurements for 3 days, and the third week of the measurements, each of the maps represents one activity. And the scale of these maps, the color scale, ranges from 0 in darker color, and in white would be more than 2,000 lux. But you can see here by the colors that the illuminances in these classrooms with daylighting only ranges from almost 300 and almost 1,000 lux. We use then this overlap of the illuminance maps with the behavioral maps to understand where the children were located. And we saw that in most of the classrooms, during most of the activities, the children were located in the range of illuminances between 300 and 3,000 lux, which is good in terms of natural lighting, because these maps were not plotted considering the lighting coming from the artificial lighting. And we also analyze the illuminances during each activity. But for this analysis, we use the mean illuminance during each activity, and because of that, we couldn't find a illuminance higher than 3,000 lux. But here we can see that in average, for all the classrooms, the illuminance level was around 479 lux with daylighting, and when the artificial lighting was turned on, the illuminance level was very similar, around 461 lux. Even though if we are looking or reaching every classroom, we can see that there are big differences within them, mostly because of the orientation and of course the period of the year. So, and here, for example, this classroom was a classroom with a southwest orientation that in Brazil, southern Brazil, is kind of not that good orientation. And also it was the classroom with the smaller area of window. And regarding the use of artificial lighting, we noticed that in most of the classrooms, the lighting was kept turned on more of the 50% of the time. Only in one classroom, the artificial lighting was not used that much, only 44% of the time. And regarding the use of the curtains, they keep the curtains open around 92% of the time. That is almost, all the time. So from this preliminary study, we could conclude that despite of the differences derived from each kindergarten pedagogical model, we could see that the average classroom area occupied by the children ranges from 44% to 51% of the area. The illuminance range based on the useful daylight illuminance showed that these classrooms, the studied classrooms, the illuminance were greater than 300 lux, but it's very good in terms of natural lighting. That the teachers are in charge of the spatial configuration and environmental settings, and because of that, this kind of studies is very important to understand the ways that the environments are used and how we could improve the comfort of the space for the children based on this behavioral analysis. And in future steps for our analysis, we are going to extend the illuminance research based on spatial daylight and autonomy. Thank you very much for your attention. And that was it.
Thank you very much, Natalia. That was very interesting. Are there any urgent questions of understanding directly to this? I don't see any in the chat.
Okay.
So if no one speaks up right now, I would just directly turn over to Ricardo, who's taking us into the building sector, still in Brazil. Ricardo, please.
So, hi everyone, my name is Ricardo Rupp. Currently I'm working at the Technical University of Denmark in the Department of Civil Engineering. But the work I will present here, the data was collected in Brazil, when I was doing my PhD over there. So the work is about occupant behavior in mixed mode buildings, office buildings in southern Brazil. So yeah, several studies are showing that it's extremely important to investigate occupant behavior, especially because it has a huge impact on the indoor environment and the energy use, especially when you are trying to predict this energy use. Then there is a significant misunderstanding of the occupant behavior, which then didn't match with the actual energy use in real buildings. So this study is concerned with better understanding the occupant behavior in mixed mode buildings. So just to let you know, maybe because it's not so common, this term for some of you, mixed mode buildings are buildings that integrate the natural ventilation and the air conditioning system. So that can change these modes of operation depending on thermal conditions, like if you have an automation system in the building, or simply by just occupant intervention, like they could open and close a window. So normally the models of adaptive behaviors, they often focus on actions aimed at adapting the environment to the occupant's needs. So for example, it's common to find behavioral models of air conditioning operation or window openings and go on. But in this work, we are more concerned to go beyond these typical behavior models for building simulation and to bring insight to other adaptive actions, such as changing clothes and drinking habits during working hours. So this study was based in a large field campaign that took two years to be completed, where it was investigated several mixed mode office buildings in Florianópolis in southern Brazil. So the buildings, they operate like manually, the mixed mode operation. So users were in total control of when they want to open a window, for example, when they want to use the cooling system. So it was a manually controlled mixed mode operation. And in the office, no heating was available because, as you can see also in the graph here, the lower temperatures, they are not so low as you would see here in Copenhagen, for example. So normally office buildings over there, they don't need heating. That's what the case in the buildings, there was no heating available. So the climate of Florianópolis is humid subtropical. So the city is an island, and here in the figure, in this red circle is showing the center of the city where the buildings investigated were localized. So as you can see also the mean temperatures during the year, they range from 25 degrees in summer, the mean temperature, to a little bit above 15 degrees in winter months. So this field campaign, it consisted of occupant comfort surveys where we asked people, we delivered questionnaires and asked people how they were feeling regarding the thermal experience. And then we also measure the thermal and environmental parameters like temperature, airspeed, relative humidity. And we also monitor the occupant behavior. So when windows were open, when the air conditioning was operating, when people changed their clothes, and when they were drinking some beverages, for example. So using all this information, we analyze the data using multiple and simple logistic regressions, where we use as predictors the environmental parameters as the indoor and outdoor temperature, also the thermal sensation of people and the operation mode of the building. And we use these predictors to predict the outcomes as adaptive actions, for example, as clothing adjustments and drinking intake. Like what was the probability of drinking or a hot or cold beverage. So result, we derived a simple model of air conditioning operation as a function of the outdoor temperature. So in this figure, the curve is showing how likely it is that the air conditioning will be operating as a function of the outdoor temperature. So, for example, below 15 degrees, basically there is no air conditioning operation, and then this starts to increase. And above 25 degrees is highly likely that the air conditioning will be operating. So this simplified model, it could be used as input to building simulations to improve our predictions of energy consumption. And for Florianopolis, a study also estimates that the mixed mode strategy can save up to 35% of energy in air conditioning when compared to fully air conditioning buildings. So, and then now talking about the more adaptive actions, we derived also models of clothing adjustments. So we derived two models, one with the probability of adding a piece of clothes and the other probability of removing a piece of clothes. For both clothing adjustment models, we found that the thermal sensation was the strongest predictor. So the thermal sensation is this scale that goes from -3 cold to +3 hot, with a middle point that is neutral sensation. So it is a 7-point scale. And besides the thermal sensation, also the outdoor temperature was a significant predictor of clothing adjustments. So here I'm showing this graphically. So one figure is showing the probability of adding clothes and the other removing clothes. So in the x-axis, I have the outdoor temperature, and the different curves, they show the different, the 7 different curves, they show the thermal sensation. So blue colors, they indicated that people were feeling cold, or cooler sensations, and reddish colors is saying that people were feeling warmer sensations. So the sensations, they corresponded to the expected outcome. So for example, when people were feeling cold, they were more likely to put an extra piece of clothes, and when they are feeling warmer sensations, they were more likely to remove a piece of clothes. The outdoor temperature so indicated that at higher temperatures lead to lower probabilities of clothing adjustments for both kind of models. So this makes total sense for when you are adding clothes, right? Because if you are likely to not add more clothes when it's increasing the temperature. But for removing clothes, the explanation that why with higher temperatures there are also fewer probability of removing a clothes is because at higher temperatures, probably people were wearing the lowest acceptable clothes value that they were allowed during the office hours. So they didn't have the opportunity to remove even more clothes. They were already dressed in light garments. So then we pass now for the models of drinking intake. So first, the drinking a cold beverage. So we found that the probability of drinking a cold beverage was associated with both the indoor and outdoor temperature, and also with the operation mode of the building. So here I'm showing two figures, one for the natural ventilation mode and other for the air conditioning. And here in the x-axis, I have the indoor temperature, and the curves, they are showing different ranges of outdoor temperature. So, well, these follow as expected as well. So people were drinking more cold beverages when the temperature, both the indoor and outdoor temperature were higher. And we also are showing here that people drank a little bit more, for saying a cold beverage, during the natural ventilation operation. Now for the probability of drinking a hot beverage, we found that it was associated with the thermal sensation people were feeling and the indoor temperature. But as you can see in the figure here, where again here I have in the x-axis the indoor temperature and the 7 curves showing the thermal sensation volt. So yeah, people drink a little bit more hot beverage when they are feeling cold, but there is no such a huge difference as in the other model. And when it's becoming warmer inside, basically doesn't matter if how the people are feeling. And this probably is explained by some cultural aspects, because in South Brazil we drink a kind of tea that's called mate or chimarrão, and people, they drink this basically on a daily basis during the day. So it's really common that everyone drink that, even when it's warmer inside. Or yeah, it's a cultural aspect. So to conclude, the studies brought some insights to occupant behavior, such as patterns of changing clothes and drinking take habits. But of course, further studies are necessary to assess the impact of such actions on, for example, work's productivity or well-being. And since of course, the Behave conference was supposed to happen last year, but unfortunately couldn't happen, we proceed working with this database, and now we have a follow-up for this Behave paper in building environment, where we go deeper in the analysis and also explore further models and using other kind of statistical analysis as well. So if you are interested in the topic, please, I would recommend you to search for this publication as well. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. I found this extremely interesting with the different effects of outdoor temperatures and clothing on, and how to put that into the models. I'd have a million questions myself, but I will actually pick up the one question that I've received in the chat by Jeremy, who asks, how does your model of air conditioner use compare to minimum energy performance standards for ACs in Brazil? For instance, are current government assumptions about air conditioner use consistent with the real world use you observed in your study?
I don't think I understand very well the question.
Jeremy, are you still there? Would you like to repeat your question verbally?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks for the presentation, Ricardo. The question is really about the model that you showed of air conditioner use, increasing with every degree increase in the outdoor temperature.
Mhm.
And I guess the question is, do you think that government assumptions around air conditioner use, when that are obviously used when they're setting standards for the energy efficiency performance of air conditioners, are realistic? Or do you think that based on what you've seen in your study, they underestimate or overestimate how much air conditioners are actually used in this part of Brazil, for example?
I think they are not very realistic, no, especially now that you touch the point of the efficiency of air conditioning systems. They are really low, the standards in Brazil. So especially, for example, I didn't have time to comment on that, but all of these buildings that they were mixed mode, they were using split air conditioners. And this is the requirements of for this kind of air condition. They are really low compared to international standards. So probably, it's underestimated both the use and the energy implications of the use of the air conditioning.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I have no other direct question in the chat. So thank you, Ricardo. I'll save my own questions for later. And let's now turn to the presentation by Ravi and Annalena on sustainable cities in Cambodia. So off to another continent.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction and welcome from our side. I'll share my screen. So you all see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. So welcome, and my colleague Ravi from the Department of Geography at Hamburg University, and I'm Annalena from Environmental Psychology at the University of Magdeburg, and today we are going to present our research to you dealing with sustainable building and sustainable living in the capital of Cambodia, Phnom Penh. We are both part of the Build for People project, which is within a larger funding initiative from the BMBF concerning sustainable development of urban regions. And the Build for People project is a transdisciplinary project, so that's why we also come here as from two different disciplines. And we are within this project, we consider the urban quality of life and sustainability with a people-centered approach. And our motivation and research agenda is looking at the rapid urbanization of Phnom Penh and socio-economic changes. So the dynamic construction activities, they are still lacking of legislation that concerns energy efficiency demands. And along with the emerging urban middle class, we see more resource-intense lifestyles. So there is an increasing energy consumption, and especially also a high share of the residential sector. And when looking at the energy mix of Cambodia, there is still not a too high share of renewables. So energy consumption is still putting a burden on the global ecological system. So this construction boom and the increasing energy consumption is coming with diverse, increasing local and global environment impacts. So that's why we want to have a look at the behavior, at the energy behavior, and also consider how the individuals and as consumers and residents are also influenced by their built environment and by the energy system. And here to give you a short, deeper understanding of the context of energy behavior in Cambodia, especially in Phnom Penh, we see that the energy use in residential buildings is dominated by lighting, cooking, refrigerating, and space cooling. And just to also strengthen that we have a look at the urban context, because we can also see from the infrastructure and energy supply in Cambodia that there's of course a high discrepancy between the urban and the rural context. And because we see in the like in Phnom Penh, about 85% of the overall electricity consumption is based here. So, but yeah, just to also make clear that there would be another approach for the whole country. But like our specific research question is now from our two disciplines, what contextual and psychological determinants of energy behavior are found for citizens of Phnom Penh, with the aim of also being able to suggest intervention techniques that could foster sustainable behaviors and energy-saving behaviors, and then also to have a look at this broader transition context that Ravi will introduce. So with the question of how the individual behavior relates to the wider socio-technical system of the building sector in Cambodia. And our research methodology is that we did a household survey that we already pre-tested last year, and that took place now in the beginning of this year with 510 households of Phnom Penh. And Ravi did stakeholder interviews last year. And so that's what he is going to refer to. So we asked in our survey, we are asking for some, of course, for the income and the energy consumption in kilowatt hours, and there we can already see that we see that the income groups, they differ in their energy consumption. That was also shown by a one-way ANOVA, which was significant. And we were also asking for self-reported energy behavior. Among other self-reported pro-environmental behaviors, we were asking for how often people turn off the lights when leaving the room, how often they reduce the use of air conditioning to limit electricity consumption, and how often they try to reduce the amount of energy for cooking. And there we could also see from one-way ANOVAs that also the income was related to the energy-saving behavior, which is not surprising as electricity prices are quite high. So we observed that among the less wealthy incomes group, there was a higher degree of self-reported energy-saving behavior. Of course, we also have to see the limitations of the self-reported behavior, to look at the answer patterns and also the background of the availability of devices or energy supply at home. For example, when we took a look at the answering patterns concerning the reducing the air conditioning, we were seeing at the subsample that was also stating to have no air conditioning devices, that they also stated to reduce the use of air conditioning. So that would be a question if they also refer to another context, for example, for the workplace or public buildings, or if this was also a social desirable answer that they gave. So we did further, we took other considerations that are dealing with more psychological determinants of behavior. So we're here referring to the value belief norm theory that tries to explain pro-environmental behaviors, to have a look at values or cognitive constructs that might influence the energy-saving behavior. So we measured the values of the participants, like biospheric, altruistic, or egoistic values, and multiple regression analysis showed that the biospheric and altruistic values, that they can explain a share of energy-saving behavior. So to also leave some time for Ravi's work, I will just give a short overview that we also considered the awareness of consequences. And there we are still thinking that, for example, electricity consumption, that the causal relation to global climate change might still be less salient as other environmental problems. So this would be also one thing we would consider that would be decisive for energy saving behavior and also personal, social, or societal norms. But yeah, that would be something we could discuss at another stage. So I would hand over to Ravi, who will also take a look at how the individuals are embedded in the socio-technical system.
All right. Thank you, Annalena. So based on the exploratory interviews, we have developed a set of transition pathways that were discussed by the building regime stakeholders. And they generally highlighted that the current policy regime is not very conducive to household-based installation of renewables. And we also learned that many elements of the building regime, such as regulation or guidelines, finance capital, and also many firms are rather global in scale than national. Then many stakeholders also voiced their skepticism regarding state-driven regulatory approaches. And this is due to a history of failed or unsuccessful policy initiatives in a context with very weak law enforcement and policy implementation. And instead, they highlighted ideas that we termed a lifestyle-led transition pathway. And you can see a quote of an architect here who, when he was talking about private green building certification, argued that in Cambodia, education models, rules, and policies are lacking, and that people are looking for something that rather represents trust, confidence, prosperity, and that it is also important to, quote, look like the big guy, unquote. And others argued that it must be very, it should be trendy or cool to live in a green building or to have a building that is certified as such, and that this could be a very effective tool for the mainstreaming of green or sustainable buildings. And then another pathway that we developed here based on the interviews is that of a multi-stakeholder platform-led transition pathway, which also leads me to the last slide, yes, as we want to follow on with this in the next phase. So based on Noboa's ideas of transdisciplinary transition management arenas and strategic niche management in the Global South, we want to implement a sustainable building arena and an incubator in Phom Penh. And the arena is planned as a workshop series where a transition team works together with local frontrunners to co-develop problem framings and visions and strategies. And given this being a relatively protected space, it aims to co-create knowledge and support the formation of informal institutions, networks, alternative discourses, and to finally hereby somehow empower these actors. And as a research project, we want to facilitate and analyze these processes in the coming 4 years from a transition studies perspective. Yeah. So this is from our side here, from University of Hamburg.
Yes, and as an outlook from our psychological perspective on the individuals, we one important insight is that we consider this socioeconomic background as important for impactful behaviors, and that there will be different ways of addressing environmental behaviors differently with different incentives and motivational aspects, and also this thinking about awareness raising of local and global environmental consequences. So this would be something we would also like to discuss with our local stakeholders and to discuss those intervention techniques. And from the methodological point of view, we still are working on further development of our measures and to be also able to include psychological and context factors in path models that can explain energy saving behavior in Phnom Penh. So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to have any questions or feedback.
Thank you very much, Annalena and Ravi. Personally, I like these combinations of different disciplines very much in behavioral research. This was a good example. Are there in the audience any direct questions? I don't have any in the chat, but I would actually have one myself. No one speaks up. Annalena, in your model of the stated energy behaviors, what people do in the households, do they switch off the light, do they turn down the aircon? Could you somehow control for the behaviors of the other people in the household? Because it's actually a problem we have in my project as well. So your work is quite close to what we do. We should exchange bilaterally anyway. But could you somehow control for that?
We can. Yeah, we only can control for the amount of other people living in the household, and we know if the participants that answered, if they were the household like heads and responsible for decisions concerning the household, maybe also in investment decisions. But we can't see what other people that were not answering how they behave. Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, as I said, we're struggling in our surveys with the same problem, that the bill you look at the end may still be influenced by the other people, but we should exchange bilaterally. Anyway, thank you very much again. I would now like to turn over to the next presenter. That's Rajat, who's going to explain what's going on in residential electricity use in India. Rajat, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to take you from Cambodia to India, where there's a similar study, a different scope probably. So I'm going to present some initial empirical studies that we've done on studying residential electricity use in India and what are the socio-technical factors that influence it. This study is part of a wider Indo-UK research program that I'm leading with partners in India, which is IIIT Hyderabad and MNIT Jaipur. And I'm going to present some initial findings from that work. So why India? Why now? What's the rationale? It's quite obvious. The residential sector, particularly the electricity use in residential buildings in India, has tripled since the past 2 decades. Currently, it accounts for a quarter of overall electricity use, and it's going to rise by about 5 times as per government predictions in about 12 years. Whatever that increase is going to be, whether it's 4 times or 5 times, is going to be phenomenal. And a large part of that increase will come from urban households which are going to get air conditioned very rapidly. Despite all this, we realize that there's paucity of empirical data, there's limited empirical data available on residential energy use, which, as you all know, is essential for developing energy policy or energy programs. A recent study by GBPN, the Global Building Performance Network, revealed, across 4 areas they had looked at, the US, EU, China, and India. And what they found was that the performance data related to residential buildings in India was the most poor quality across the 4 regions. So whichever side you look at, there is limited data available. Where data are available, they're not shared that widely. And I think that's another question I would like to bring to the table for the session, that how do we encourage people to share such data so that people don't have to repeat those efforts. Also, studies which examine what causes residential energy use, what are the factors, are currently lacking. They're very limited, small scale studies, and as you know, you need large scale studies for developing energy efficiency programs. And then, as I said, this is a study which is part of a wider research program called Residential Building Energy Demand Reduction, which I'm leading from Oxford Brookes. And we are planning to monitor about 2,000 buildings across the country. So what I'm presenting is really a pilot study at the moment. So in terms of the overview, this paper, investigated, how and why electricity is used in Indian dwellings, both with and without air conditioning. This was a pilot study to test our methods, so we weren't overly concerned about the statistical power the representativeness of the sample because we were testing our methods, and and we studied about 41 dwellings with the pilot across two cities, Hyderabad and Jaipur, both of which represent the composite climate of India. Remember, in the Indian context, you have all kinds of climatic zones, right from hot and dry to very cold and temperate climates, including the very difficult composite climate, which has a very cold winter and very hot summer with a monsoon season. We focus particularly on this climatic zone because it has a lot of energy implications from a cooling point of view. Our approach was based on this was a face-to-face survey, so this was pre-COVID. We could go into homes, but we still used an online Google form to gather the data, and it covered both the physical aspects of dwellings, so looking at built form, windows, orientation, but also then income groups, occupancy patterns, socio-demographics, their appliance usage, both in AC and non-AC dwellings. And then that data was then cleaned and statistical analysis was undertaken. We also managed to gather historic electricity data for the year 2018-19. Although I'm not showing here, but we installed sensors which measure electricity use every 5 minutes in each of these dwellings. And we've also got temperature and humidity loggers in the most occupied room, which has air conditioning in it. So we could cross-relate indoor temperature and relative humidity with when the air conditioning was used. And I'm not presenting that data in this paper. I'm just focusing on the survey and the electricity bills for the moment. So just to give you an idea of the dwellings, you can look at the photographs to see how different they are. As you can imagine, India is dominated by income groups, and that is what the sample also had, a variety of low income groups, middle income, and high income groups. The bands for these are defined by different government programs, depending upon household income and ownership of appliances. So we had a good mix of all three income groups. About 68% of the sample, 28 dwellings, had one or more air conditioning units. Remember, in India, the air conditioning is not centralized. You will have a window unit or a split unit, which are really room-based or space-based. And typically, you have somewhere between 1 and 4 air conditioning units in a home. Out of the 41, 13 homes did not have any air conditioning. So they had ceiling fans and desert coolers, but not air conditioning. All of them almost had a refrigerator and television. And they were a mix in terms of the physical forms. We had 29 standalone houses and 12 apartments. The mean built-up area was about 150 square meters, and the mean annual electricity use was just under 3,600 kilowatt hours. We then started to dig a bit deeper into the data to see, how the data was varying across the income groups. So here you see, low income group, medium income group, and high income group, and you can see each dwelling annual electricity use, also electricity use per square meter per year, the EPI, or the energy use intensity, and also electricity use per occupant, because remember, number of occupants would matter in countries such as India, which could be quite dense in households, and that needs to be taken into account. We got some very interesting results across the income groups. So if you see here, the first one is electricity use per square meter per year, and as you can see, with a higher income group, the kilowatt hours per square meter per year is increasing, going from 18 kilowatt hours to 32. But what you also notice is there's a wide range within that income group as well. So the income group is not just the only factor. There are other factors at play as well, like what appliances they have, how much they use. And then if you look at the mean annual electricity use per occupant, you come across similar trend in terms of higher income group has the highest, electricity use per occupant. It's the lowest in the LIG occupants, LIG homes. But then the range again is pretty wide ranging. Look at that, from 146 to 1,619. So there's a lot of variation happening within those groups as well because of other factors, which I'm going to explain shortly. Then when we looked at the mean annual electricity use, higher income dwellings had more than double the amount of electricity used by the lower income dwellings. And the middle income dwellings had almost 1.5 times that of the lower income. When you look at air-conditioned dwellings versus dwellings which don't have air conditioning, there's again a big difference. So air-conditioned dwellings are using double amount of 4,208 kilowatt hours to that of dwellings without ACs. Now that's a very significant find, because if rapid air conditioning happens in Indian dwellings, especially the urban dwellings that we were studying, you're talking about the grid getting affected, almost doubling its electricity use because of air conditioning. That will kind of become widespread in the coming years, and has big implications for of course local grid stabilization and peak load as well. But as you can see that as you go towards air conditioning, electricity use doubles. The other difference, as I said, in a composite climate is that you're going to have differences between summer monsoon and the winter season. So unlike UK, where I'm based, where of course the heating period is more dominant, and you have the winter season in India, it's in the composite climate especially, it's the opposite. The summer and the monsoon is more important in terms of electricity use. And in fact, you can see the difference that the use of electricity in summer monsoon is double that of the winter season, which again has implications for wider grid management, because you're going to have seasonal loads added because of air conditioning in areas, which could lead to power outages or brownouts or other reasons. And you can see here, the graph shows a by income group, the big variation that happens across the income groups and within those as well. The other find is that when you look at electricity use between air-conditioned and non-air-conditioned dwellings, so the black bars are non-air conditioned dwellings and the gray ones are the air-conditioned dwellings, it's very obvious that the dwellings which have air conditioning units have very different energy flows across seasons, whereas there's not much difference actually in the electricity use of dwellings without air conditioning. It's pretty constant. There's very little difference because they are reliant more on forms of cooling which are less energy intensive. The other find is that when we asked people about the number of air conditioning units they had, and then looked at the air conditioning usage hours, both from self-reported data and measurements, because we are monitoring those dwellings as well, we found that having an air conditioner does not mean that you're using it. Remember, there are other reasons for having air conditioning as well in India. It's part of a kind of a status symbol. People are, they may have 5 air conditioners but use only one, because they want to occupy one. There's one room in which most of the people are occupying it, so only one air conditioning unit is used. So that's something to keep in mind, that by having more air conditioning units does not mean that you're using all of them. And even if you have air conditioning, you may not use it all the time. And I think that's very different from centralized heating model that we are used to in the Western countries. Again, we found the other find was that despite owning less number of appliances in the low income group households, they had higher annual usage hours for the appliances that they were having. This excludes air conditioning, but other non-cooling appliances were being used more. So it's not just how many appliances you have, but how much you use it for as well. We then built a kind of regression model to examine the variation in electricity use, to look at what were those key factors. And we could explain 81% of the variation in electricity use across the households through number of occupants and presence of air conditioning. So that explains quite a bit of the variation. The other factors obviously are income group, number of rooms, so how big the dwelling is, and the number of hours the appliances are used for. And these are kind of the key variables, especially the air conditioning, income group, number of rooms need to be kind of addressed when energy codes and other things are being established as they are now. So I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to bring everything together as a summary of the findings. So initial findings, as I said, these are very early results from a pilot study, is that there is of course some effect of income group on electricity use. We know that higher income dwellings are consuming twice the amount of electricity, and similarly medium income groups are using 1.5 times. So when energy efficiency policy and programs are being designed, they must be customized towards first HIG and MIG dwellings, because you can maximize energy savings there. And one size fits all approach will not work. Price incentive may not be the way of addressing HIG energy use. There might be other ways of addressing those. And the energy code in terms of design of new dwellings must look into that. Appliance usage hours had a bigger effect on electricity use than number of appliances owned. So clearly, any behavior programs that are being developed must target the energy habits of householders to not just raise energy awareness, but also awareness about energy saving behaviors amongst householders. I think purchase behaviors are important, but also habitual behaviors in this case are probably equally important. And I think a very important find is the big difference between the electricity consumption in the summer and monsoon season, which is dominated by air conditioning, than the winter period when you really have a kind of a very low period of electricity use. This has big implications for peak load management, because clearly the grid is going to be designed with your maximum load and grid stability, especially during hot summer afternoons and night time. And one of the ways of addressing that is through strategies for reducing the demand for cooling. And that's where I think the energy code will come in, which could address not just, at what set point temperature air conditioners should be working, but also how, with insulation programs, with, proper orientation, built form, the demand for cooling itself can be reduced. And I think that needs to be built in so that we don't have this big difference between the seasons as we, go ahead. I'm going to end here. Here's the website, which has a lot of information about the project, which is called Reside. The website is reside-energy.org, and you should be able to get a lot more information from there. I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rajat. Very relevant topic. Cooling and air conditioner use hasn't been, as far as I know, been looked at a lot, and it's a very underestimated sector that really needs a lot of work. So I really enjoyed your presentation. For time reasons, I would like to now directly go to the next presentation and sort of really start shifting questions towards the end. So we stay in India, but we now look at vehicles with Talat, please.
So like you said, we stick to India and we also stick to Hyderabad, but a very different sector from most of the other presentations. So we look at electric vehicles in India, and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues also. I think Subhash is present in this group, so maybe he could also come in if I miss out something. Subhash and Jyoti, and all of us work at UNEP DTU partnership at the UNCT. Why transport and why electric mobility? Because I think it is quite known that transportation is responsible for a large section of CO2 emissions. And if the world has to move towards now 1.5 degree pathways, and a large part of the global fleet will have to become electric. So that is what has been projected. A lot has been done, and this has reflected into large numbers of electric vehicle sales, which have really gone up over the last years, and especially in Europe and in China, a lot of electric sales have happened. But despite this large numbers of electric sale, so we are just adding up to a very small number. It accounts for a very small amount of market share and also a very small amount of global vehicle stock. So, and in India also, like, there is a lot of push towards green mobility and also towards electric mobility through several policies across years. And recently, like, there have been subsidies given for EVs and for charging infrastructure, etc. And several, like, so there has been this National Electric Mobility Plan, which was launched in 2013. And then Phom, which promotes hybrid and electric vehicles, was launched in 2015. And since 2017, several states in India have come up with their own electric vehicle policies. And this study was like placed around 2017, before these policies had come. And just after 2017, we also did a subsequent study, which I will share the links to at the end of this presentation. So despite this strong push towards EVs, the vehicle sales in India have gone up, but again, like the global vehicle sales, the initial stockpile was quite low. So you are just adding to a small stockpile, and the market share of all electric vehicles in India is not even 1%. It is at around 7%. So we looked at into this study was done in 2017, and when we looked at that time the global literature on what are the barriers, and the barriers were very common at that and well known. So they were like high cost of electric vehicles, performance of electric vehicles, charging infrastructure, and awareness. And then we took this and for an exploratory study in Hyderabad. Why Hyderabad? Because we thought like Hyderabad has lots of IT groups, and it could represent as uh, a typical city in India, uh, which is forward looking. So basically, like we had this linked with the uh, barriers. We had this starting hypothesis that low awareness reduces the propensity to buy EVs, inferior performance of EVs. Remember, this study was done in 2017. So relative to conventional vehicles, reduces the propensity to buy EVs, and better charging infrastructure can increase the propensity to buy EVs, and linked to the other things, higher purchase cost also reduces the propensity to buy EVs. We did a consumer survey in June to September 2017. We collected revealed choices, and also we collected stated preference choices. I will show the templates that we use later on, wherein we presented alternative scenarios of EV infrastructure, EV vehicle technology, and policies using flashcards, and then we asked responses from the respondents. So basically, initially we were targeting around 950 samples, but we collected, it's just a round number, 1,000 samples. We also did some other surveys, but I'm not concentrating on them in this presentation, wherein we also looked at some existing customers, and we could collect a small number of them. We talked to government officials and stakeholders. We could do 5 interviews, and we also talked to dealers, etc., to get their perspective. But in this presentation, I'm not looking at that. I'm only looking at the first aspect. Who did we survey? So mainly because this survey was done in offices. So most of the group that the respondents were in the age group between 18 to 30, and also like 30 to 40, and most of them were males, and a large portion of them were also single. So it was a young, mostly male, and mostly single population that we surveyed. So this could also be an indicative of the people who are going to like the growing population of India, which might be buying vehicles in future. In terms of ownership of vehicles among the people that we surveyed, very little of them had bicycles. Most of them owned vehicles, and most of them owned bikes. So bikes are the motorcycles in India, and these are very typical for any city in India, also in Vietnam, where we have lots of bikes and scooters. In terms of cars, most of them had hatchbacks, and very little, a few of them had SUVs. Because this was from offices, again connected to the vehicle ownership, most of them used bikes or scooters for the regular travel, and very less used bicycles for regular travel, but significantly large portion of them also use public transport. To check awareness, we asked them as to how many auto manufacturers and electric auto manufacturers they knew. So a large portion of them knew up to around 5 to 7 auto manufacturers, and then it really went down. In terms of number of electric auto manufacturers known, most of them didn't know any auto manufacturer, and then some of them did know one to about four or five manufacturers. Most of the respondents that we asked were not aware about government incentives. And generally, people traveled around 60 kilometers a day, and about like 60% of the people traveled around, about around 50. From 50%, it started tapering down in terms of travel time, and it was around 60 minutes for most of the people. We also asked them like where would they prefer charging. So most of the people preferred charging at home, and next was workplace and at public charging stations. And how much were they willing to wait for charging? So so most of the people were not willing to wait more than 15 minutes for charging. We also asked them to rate how they look at different elements of electric mobility. And critically, most of the people were worried about availability of charging stations. They were also worried about purchase cost. Then I think it's quite important. Many people thought environment is also important. There were worries about driving range and about look and feel of the vehicle, and other elements also. So they were asked to rate from most critical to not critical in this case. So for the stated choice questions, we did a hierarchical survey. So initially, we asked them if there was an intention to buy a vehicle. So yes or no, and then for both sections we gave them an informed choice as to like if you would buy a conventional vehicle, this would be the cost, and if you would buy an electric vehicle, this would be the cost. And based on their informed choice, they again said yes or no. And then we took up the no samples, and then we showed them that okay, if certain policy scenarios, incentives were given, would you choose electric vehicle or not? So then some said yes and some said no again. And for the people who said no, again we told them that okay, if some financial incentives were given, would you choose an electric vehicle or not? And then again, like we got yes and no as an answer there. And this is the flashcard that we showed to the people, wherein so this were the cost in 2017 for a hatchback car, and so we in the end told them that okay, this is the all-inclusive ownership cost that you will have, and based on this, can you please take a decision? And this is the scenario one, where we told them that okay, these are the policy incentives that can be given to you, like no parking fees, priority driving lanes, free pass to use public transport, set quick charging points at home. So basically, we looked at what type of policies were there in Europe, etc. at that time, and based on that, we tried to create this policy scenario. And in the last, the financial incentive scenario, we asked them we gave them several financial incentives like no road tax, lower finance, and we tried to make electric vehicle attractive there for them, just trying to see like how much would be a captive conventional mode users. So this is what we got. So initially there was like upfront a large section of respondents said no, that they were not interested in buying electric vehicles. But among the people who said yes, they had an intention to buy electric vehicles. Moment we informed them that, okay, these are the costs of buying an electric vehicle and operating it, some of them already said that they would, like about 34 of them said they might not use it. And of those that said that they would not use it, who had initial intention to buy, once policy incentives and financial incentives were given to them, some of them shifted. Around 32 of them shifted. So at least only there were 2 people who in the end said that they would not buy, even if the financial incentives and policy incentives were given. In terms of people who said no, from 461, around 187 were captive conventional vehicle owners, and a large portion of them, large portion of people who initially said no also shifted when financial incentives were given. And we did a logistic regression analysis to find out like what are the motivators and what motivates choices, etc. Sorry, can I go back? So basically, like what we find from this is it is the young in terms of scooters. Also, like if odd ratio is 1, it is neutral. If it is below 1, then the probability of choosing the vehicle reduces, and if it is above 1, then the probability of choosing the vehicle increases. So basically, if the reference category is above 50, it was shown that like the lower age people had a larger chance of choosing scooter. People who had single would choose a scooter or a moped, and like if they knew more electric manufacturers, it increased the chance of them buying one. And if the resale people who thought resale value were very like sensitive to resale values, also thought choosing a scooter would be interesting. In terms of car, it was the mid-age people who would buy.
Sorry,
cars.
Talat, to interrupt, but we were sort of running out of time. Please come to
This is the last slide. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't see the. And it is the married. So I'll just conclude. Yeah, because it says the same thing. So the study finds that there is limited awareness of incentives provided by the government. Awareness towards the incentive provided by the government for electric vehicles. Additional policy incentives, example parking charges, financial incentives, would increase the propensity to use electric vehicles. It is the young and the unmarried would basically choose scooters, and married with children and middle-aged population would choose electric cars. And factors like resale value, maintenance cost are very important while considering purchase of any vehicle. We did a follow-up study in Pune, and these documents are available. And on behalf of all my authors, I would like to thank you, and questions are invited. Thank you. Sorry for being a little over time.
No worries. Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting, and I'm a bit sad we don't have time to go deeper into all the nice studies. Please, the audience, already use the option to contact the authors directly with your questions, comments via the chat or via email or however. And I would now directly go to the last presentation, which is my own one, and I will try to hurry up a little bit so we can actually have some time at the end still. Anyway, it's stuck. I hope you can see it, but I'll start talking already. I'm going to give a bit more of an overview, bird's eye overview paper on the role of behavioral insights as part of policy mixes in developing countries. Because I believe often we do behavior change interventions start to do more behavior change interventions, but very isolated. And this work is part of a bigger project on carbon consumption patterns of the emerging middle classes in Ghana, Peru, and the Philippines, where we actually also do household surveys and practical field experiments on behavior change, but also qualitative and more conceptual work like this one. Okay, so now my screen is completely stuck. No, that's okay. Now it's doing the presentation mode. Well, that's nice, but only a part of it. Anyway, I'll just keep talking. So, as you know, or this audience knows, behavioral insights have been taken up in demand-side management and energy transitions a lot recently. From my perspective, they're mostly useful in this sort of policy design and policy evaluation phase. So when it comes to understanding context, when it comes to doing impact evaluations or actually micro-behavior studies, not sort of at the point where you start big overall policy goal strategies. The focus this far has been mostly on energy efficiency studies and okay, my computer's doing funny things. On energy efficiency and energy saving, and less so on renewables and energy access. This far, as I guess many of you know, default settings and social norms have been most effective, and replications, especially of social norm interventions and feedback, are ongoing in many low and middle income countries as well. But what I found from the review of the literature, 3 major challenges remain. Effect sizes of these behavior interventions are, they vary a lot across contexts and countries. And even if you use proven methods, there may still be just a 1% effect, and next time there's a 5% effect. And overall, actually, effects are quite small. And they tend to be not very persistent. So we still need to find out how we can increase persistence. And what I'm mostly thinking about, like, it's totally unclear under which combinations or which combinations of behavioral insights and other energy policy principles actually work best. So how do we get behavior insights into the package? Is it once we do these sort of voluntarily or often perceivably easier behavior change intervention, does that crowd out regulations, stricter regulations such as bans or something? Or what's happening? So the key question is, how can these behavioral insights really be integrated into policy packages in developing countries? And what can they and really can they not do? To tackle that question, just a few general remarks. I'm sure many of you know this, but just to repeat for the broader audience, why are developing countries and so-called informal sectors or often it's a mix, why is that special? What's going on? First of all, there are often other policy objectives than in industrialized countries on energy. Energy access is more of a priority and stable supply than actually a transition to cleaner energies or energy efficiency. Also, energy and development goals need to be balanced under conditions of financial and technical constraints. So, you know, if you're general as a policymaker, you risk there's only so much I can do, and I have to balance these goals. That actually impacts political options. And the financial constraints in energy policy also affect, for example, test and control capacities for minimum energy performance standards, for any sort of regulation in the field. And unfortunately, often weak institutions and limited state effectiveness coincide with low levels of compliance, both in the formal and informal parts of the markets. So here again, the question is, what role could behavioral insights or behavior change play? If actual compliance to stricter regulations is low, could behavioral insights come in positively? As a background, also, it's necessary to know that the energy, the power sector reforms of the 1990s in the developing countries have very, different success. So there's a lot of, how do I say that, baggage left over from that period in political economy terms. You know, some of the regulators may function, may not function well. Markets have been liberalized, but corruption is still ongoing. Prices are difficult to set. So while we still have that situation, now there's a stronger role of the state required again to push for clean energy transitions, all the while avoiding political capture. Looking a bit more in depth at demand side management, because that's where behavioral insights are most likely to come in helpful. Just 3 general points to keep in mind when trying to design policy packages in developing countries. First of all, the energy mix used by consumers is different. So it's not only the usual grid electricity, but it's quite often a combination of electricity, of charcoal, of fuels, and those are not only related to income levels. So even high income people may still resort to paraffin or to charcoal for cooking or for other reasons. So there are different behavioral patterns attached to this this energy mix. So only targeting one of them, for example, grid electricity or energy efficiency on the grid, people may just shift to using another source of energy, you see. Second area, there's a huge difference. Electricity pricing and so-called non-technical losses, which includes electricity theft. Tariffs are not, as in European countries, uniform. So there are usually lifeline tariffs for the poor. Then there's a staggered tariff, so that actually the more you use, the more you pay, to cross-subsidize actual payments. And that also this issue of habitual electricity theft that impacts any behavior change intervention. Finally, as a general point, the availability of technology and the functioning of the markets may be different. Technologies may not be available, or the actual sort of phase-in process you have from a political side, phasing in green technologies may get stuck in the implementation, because the informal markets where a lot of secondhand sales are ongoing, where sometimes illegal imports of other goods are ongoing, and you have the limited state capacity to control that. There may be sort of a trickle-down effect, but it's quite likely to get stuck unless some additional political support or intervention comes in. So interim conclusion at this point, behavioral insights, in my view, cannot replace ineffective states or weak institutions. They're unlikely to produce large persistent effects under conditions of informality that I just described by themselves, as sort of stronger market dynamics and often a lack of infrastructure and context conditions tend to prevail. What BI can do is enhance trust, build on networks, take up the social situation we have in those markets, and use that to change social norms and really understand the context to actually then design measures. And I would just very quickly look at the example of the Philippines. of the second-hand market of air conditioners, the current policy mix is very comprehensive. It's nicely done. It has more or less everything you're supposed to have. There's also a political goal to reduce energy consumption and to make use of some behavior change programs. The question now that the Energy Ministry has is, how do we regulate the market for second-hand appliances? Because from an energy perspective, you want the most energy efficient devices entering the markets as soon as possible. But you also have the material resource footprint, which actually would say that repairing, recycling, reusing is useful. You also have the positive development effects of air conditioner use and air conditioner ownership. So you don't want to just say people don't use air cons. And also there are a lot of livelihoods dependent on the used AC market. And actually, I have used 10 minutes already. So I will just briefly, do a brief summary. I looked at how the air conditioning market works, the second-hand market in Metro Manila, using semi-structured interviews, so finding out how actually the business models work, where the air cons come from, who sells what, how, who are the customers, and drawing on that, I would say that a possible policy mix for actually tackling this market somehow would need to be a combination of financial incentives, bans of harmful substances, which then have the challenge of not being able to be controlled on the ground, and possibly really getting the technicians and the retailers in the second-hand market into the system somehow with behavior change interventions, drawing on the networks, drawing on the pride they have for their jobs, using some of the starting points I found. So this mix of stringent regulations and behavioral insights could really be a way forward, because if we only went for stricter regulations trying to phase out all inefficient devices, the second-hand market for air cons will simply move completely into a clandestine market. It will not disappear. And with that, I will stop and stop sharing my screen. Sorry for going over time and the hiccups. And there are several questions, but we're already over time. Jeremy, I would respond to your question bilaterally, and I will only maybe read out Jeremy's questions to Ravi, so Ravi, that you can respond bilaterally as well. Jeremy is saying, Ravi mentioned the current policy regime was disincentivizing the installation of renewables. Can you provide some examples of this? So Ravi, please respond to Jeremy. It's Jeremy from IEA. You should be able to find him on the chat. And with that, I'm very sorry that now after all we don't have any time for more comments, but I found all these presentations extremely interesting, and I enjoyed hearing what other people are doing, and I hope you did as well, and you take this opportunity to enter into more deeper discussions with the presenters, and we're just slightly over time. That's it for the session. Thank you all. Thank you especially to the speakers. Sorry that this all was a bit rushed. We now are going into lunch break until 1 o'clock, and I hope to e-meet or somehow keep in touch with you over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you.